One of the strangest meetings that you can ever get called into as a yield leader is something like this. Every line of business is reporting that their price realization has improved, and yet the total company revenue is down. It sounds impossible, but this actually happens more than you would think in digital media. And today I'm going to walk through an example or a couple of examples of the problem that in revenue management and yield management is called the mix problem. So this week's video is based on something that I've seen many times over the years, and if it's not identified, it can go on to cause problems for a company trying to maximize its digital media yield. And what makes it tricky is that even well-intentioned teams can be doing exactly what management has been asking them to do and still ending up with less revenue. So let's walk through a simple example. Imagine a publisher with two products. We're going to call product A premium inventory and product B standard run of sight inventory. Premium sells at higher prices, but both products are good products. All right, so let's imagine that this publisher has 200 million impressions to sell. Premium sells at twice the price of the standard inventory, so it's selling at $20 CPM. The standard run of sight is selling at $10 CPM, and we have 100,000 impressions being sold against each. So premium's making $2 million in revenue, the standard run of sight is making $1 million, and the total revenue for the site is $3 million. Hopefully pretty straightforward. Now, the management team gives the broader team a very reasonable instruction to improve price realization. So the teams responsible for both premium and standard go out and do that. The premium team increases the CPM by 10%. The standard run of sight increases by 10% also, and on paper everything looks like a success. But something subtle happens. Because premium has become slightly more expensive for some buyers, and those buyers may begin to shift towards the standard product instead. And so, before I show you the result, let me ask you a quick question. If both products increase their price, what do you expect to happen to total revenue? And most people would say that the total revenue should increase. And let's see what actually happened. After the price change, the premium homepage has indeed increased its price up to $22, standards up to $11. Premium selling 60,000 impressions, and the standard run of sight is selling all the rest of the site out, 140,000 impressions. But now, if we add up the revenue totals, what we see is that the total revenue comes to $2.86 million. In other words, slightly less than we were making before. And again, let's look carefully at what happened. Both products increased their price realization, but the total went down. Why? Because the mix of products changed. More demand moved towards the lower valued product, which resulted in lower overall yield for the business. And this is obviously a toy example, and the answer is obvious, but in a real publisher, you can have dozens of overlapping products. You can have multiple sales teams, different pricing structures, and sometimes even different lines of business. And when this mix occurs, it can be extremely difficult to detect. And each team may honestly be reporting our price realization improved, and they could all be correct, but the overall system for yield deteriorates. Now, before you say, James, why are you wasting my time with such a simple example? Let's change the problem just a little bit. Let's go back to the original setup. We start with two products, premium at $20 and standard at $10, and we sold 100 million impressions of each, $3 million of revenue. Now we introduce a new product, something very common in digital media and in retail media. We launch a new product, something called audience extension, that allows us to sell impressions not just on our own site, but across the web. So instead of selling 200 million impressions on our own site, we now sell 50 million on other sites for a total of 250 million impressions. And at first glance, that sounds like great news. We got more scale, more impressions, and more revenue opportunity. But before we look at the numbers, let me ask you a question, and you can probably guess where this is going. If the company launches a new product and sells 25% more impressions, what would you expect to happen to revenue? And most people should expect that the revenue would increase. But let's see what actually happens. The premium product now is selling less impressions, 40 million impressions. The standard run of sight is selling 110, and we're selling audience extension both on network and off network. So it's all classified as the audience extension product, and the revenue from that is significantly less. The revenue in this case is only going to be $2.7 million. And so let's think about what just happened. The company launched a new product. It increased the total supply from 200 to 250 million impressions, created more scale and more activity, and yet the revenue fell from 3 million to $2.7 million. Why? Again, the mix shift occurred. Audience extension didn't steal demand just from standard and inventory. It also stole it from premium, which is what can happen in real life advertising businesses. Buyers still want the audience, they just want to find it in a cheaper way. And that is exactly why the whole function of yield management exists. Somebody needs to be responsible for the system level economics of the business, not just the individual products. Because optimizing each product individually does not optimize the business as a whole. That oversight might sit with a yield management team, revenue operations, or sometimes finance. But someone needs to be watching the mix. So let me be incredibly clear about the purposes of these examples. I am not saying don't try and increase the price realization of product lines. Absolutely you should. And I'm definitely not saying don't launch audience extension. It can be an incredibly valuable product. The key is to make sure that you are not inadvertently cannibalizing your own demand. I'm James Deaker. I am the Yield Doctor. Thanks for watching.